Welcome to the riskadvisor.com podcast. I'm Sal Lafreri, and I'm here with my good friend and co-host, Jim Henry. So today's topic, we're going to talk about client denial for cybersecurity. Why clients, for the most part, or most people, just don't really want to think about cybersecurity. I mean, they worry about identity theft, but there's so much more to it, and obviously we want to have a chat about that today. Jim, when you were CEO of the company, was cyber anything that was something that you had to worry about?
Nothing like the degree that we have now. But I believe that a big part of the problem of the denial is, a lot of C-levels in the C-level suite are smart enough to know how much they don't know. And it's really like opening up, a can of worms. Where will it end? And it's almost like, ignorance is bliss, but not for long. So it is, it's better to tackle this and to recognize the problem, because any problem is solvable if you first start with identifying that there's a problem there. And I think that's really 80% of the battle.
And, a lot of it too just seems like, everybody's worrying about being in the weeds. It's just, you got to get too down into the weeds to worry about this stuff and have bigger issues to worry about. But the liability and the risk is just so great. And you don't have to get that far down into the weeds to worry about it.
No,
but
no. And again, in my years in my career in physical security, granted there's risks, with the door forced open and things like that, but nothing to the extent of what you can have with a cyber breach. So there is really great risk there, and it needs to be taken seriously and addressed with. And the threats continue to evolve. It's not like, you come up with a set of solutions today and you can forget about it for 5 years. So.
Well, we actually have a CEO today with us from Rock Tech Services, who's our guest, who we're going to get into this a little bit more deeply. But today we want to talk to Michael Bedigol. He's an innovative leader, an entrepreneur, and an author with over 25 years of experience leading large-scale initiatives for some of the world's leading financial institutions on both the buy and sell side. Recently, Michael was the president and chief operating officer of a $1 billion quantitative trading firm, where he ran all operations, non-trading activities, including compliance, technology, human resources, investor relations, legal, and market data administration. After a job title like that, I now understand why you left and started Raw. Who wants to be responsible for all of that? Welcome to the show, Michael. Appreciate you being here.
Thank you, Sal.
All right, tell us, before we get into the questionnaires, tell us a little bit about Rock.
So Rock Tech Services was created in 1998. I started the firm because I saw an opportunity to service small and medium-sized businesses that really weren't getting the attention they deserved, especially around cyber awareness and cybersecurity. So Rock Tech Services focuses exclusively on small and mid-sized businesses. And we found that there's a great market there for people that not only need and want the help, but really crave the opportunity to learn more about how they can protect themselves and how they can keep their clients' data protected.
So, again, why do businesses really need to worry about cybercrime, especially on the smaller scale? We did a show recently where we were talking about bugging. Mm-hmm. And people always, clients would always say, I have nothing that anybody wants. Why would they bug me? Mm-hmm. Right? Similarly, I'm thinking it's got to be in your world. It's got to be a similar thing. Cybercrime, do they really believe that they could become a victim? So why should they be worrying about it?
I think you hit the nail right on the head. A lot of small and mid-sized businesses are in denial about cybersecurity because they believe that they're either too small, that hackers wouldn't want to look at them, or they have really nothing of value that a hacker could steal and then sell. And nothing could be further from the truth.
So, having said that, what do you see as the biggest cybersecurity threat now?
The biggest cybersecurity threat, without a doubt, is ransomware and funds transfer, right? Those are the two things that are the biggest targets right now for businesses. And what hackers are doing is they're going business by business by business looking for vulnerabilities. So anyone that believes that they've been hacked for a reason, or they come out of a hack and say, why me? Why did they target me? It's not because they were targeted per se. It's because hackers just go along and look for vulnerabilities. When they see it, they exploit it. So what they'll do is they'll enter into an organization, and they may sit there for months, and without, unbeknownst to the owners of the company, and they'll collect data. They'll understand the patterns. They'll understand the colloquialism. They'll understand all of the habits that are passing between the users. And then at the right moment, they'll slip in an email that says, hey, I changed my account number. Hey, can you wire it here instead of here? And it really tricks people into this false sense of security. And it's really important that people stay aware of these different things and understand that you can have a hacker inside your business long before the hack even becomes apparent.
Is it similar to in cyberbullying cases, cyber stalking cases? It's not one-on-one anymore. You can have, one perp could be stalking 5, 6 people at a time, sometimes more. Is it similar in that case?
It absolutely is. I mean, hackers are smart enough to know these days, and they've become very sophisticated. They're smart enough to know that if they hack into a small business and they ask for $5 million, they're likely not going to get it. The company will sooner go out of business before they pay anyone or could pay anyone $5 million. So what do? They ask for $2,500 or $5,000, where the owner is more likely to pay it off and make the problem go away and avoid the embarrassment and just get the problem out of the way. So in order to make money on a larger scale with $2,500 or $5,000 ransom, they have to target hundreds, if not thousands of them to make that add up. So that's what they're doing. They're going after all these small businesses, but they'll go after as many as they can at a time.
It's kind of like direct mail marketing. You put enough out there, somebody's going to be spying.
Right.
Yeah.
And these hackers are very sophisticated. They have help desks. They have people that will educate you on how to transfer Bitcoin. They have negotiators. They have scare tactics. So they are very sophisticated in what they can do.
So, Michael, as we were talking during the pre-show, we were talking about how culturally, the buying dynamic has changed from pre 9/11 to post 9/11, when people were looking to be thought leaders and buying the latest shiny object to make it look like that they were advanced and preparing themselves against threats and terrorism, and then economic downfall of 2008, and all of a sudden, there's only 2 reasons companies spend money. One of is ROI, or return on investment, or compliance. So coming from the financial world, that's one area where compliance has put down some early roots and driven some behavior. Can you get into some of the industry-specific examples of that?
Sure. There are more and more compliance regulations coming down to protect cyber
criminals.
Yeah, exactly. Because so much more data is going electronic. And with that happening, there are more and more regulations that are coming up to protect that data, right? And what companies are forced to do is to take the necessary and reasonable precautions that would safeguard not only their own data, but client data. And 2 examples of this are the GLBA Act of 1999, where it said financial institutions have to safeguard their clients' data. And there are penalties if you don't. And there's also the HIPAA, right? So that's safeguarding the personal identifiable information of different people that come into doctor's office and so forth. So what many people don't realize is that you can have a HIPAA violation just by losing a laptop or losing a phone that doesn't have the proper security on it. And the fines can be significant. They can go up to $500,000 for one HIPAA violation.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's important that even small accounting firms, private equity firms, they understand that there is a real threat to them from hackers because they know they can get in there and ask for $5,000 or $10,000 and they're likely to get it. But there's also a threat that if they fail to protect their clients' data, one, it can wind up on the front page of the New York Times, which is the last thing you want for any business. And two, you could be in violation of a government or federal law that's going to cause you to have fines or pay restitution to victims.
So there's a litany of cyber bills that are floating around Congress, some in the House, some in the Senate, all of them entangled with all sorts of generally political poison pills to intimidate the other side or to get them to sign into something they didn't read.
Isn't that the way all bills get passed?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, thanks.
So, is there really any hope for some sustainable, coherent, holistic, cyber regulations? Do you see? And until we get past the election and get some clarity with regards to one ruling party.
Well, notwithstanding the election and the regulation that will come or should come, the businesses should take their own self-initiative to protect their own data. And whether or not regulations come down or not, it's just good best practice to ensure that you're doing everything within reason to protect the data of yourself and your client. And this way, if a regulation does come down and has teeth, you're already protected.
I would think it's not if, but when. And I know in New York, we post 9/11, local law 26, which for the audience that's not in New York is really a regulation for safety in Class A buildings and what have you. And even before the regulations passed, the Department of Buildings and is enforced now by the fire department, there was visibility to what those requirements were going to be, with regards to stairwell passage and markings and things of that nature. So I think you're right, because, once the bill's passed, then it's going to be a hurry up of how do we get the resources in here to do all this stuff right away? We're behind the eight ball. So, it is not if, it's when this does come. And it is advisable that they should be taking prudent measures now, not only because it protects them, but it will also give them a head start on what will be coming for compliance.
And not only that, but it's just good business. If you're a doctor, a lawyer, an accountant, and you can demonstrate to your clients the measures you've taken to protect their data and protect their identity, that's a huge win for that business, right? That's going to attract clients because they know you're looking after their data and you're protecting their data. And that's something that's very attractive to a potential client, I think.
Wow. All right. Well, that's going to take us into our next segment, which these are the topics we actually want to get into in a little bit more depth. But first, we want to remind you that you're listening to the Risk Advisor podcast, hosted by Jim Henry and myself, Sal Lafreri. We invite you to comment on our blog at theriskadvisor.com. and to subscribe and follow us on our social media like Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. If you happen to be interested in having one or both of us speak at an upcoming event or would like to consult with us, please go to our webpage at theriskadvisor.com to set that up. So we end segment one. We're coming into segment two, and we want to talk about how businesses can protect themselves. And things that, what do they need to understand with respect to either legal obligations or extended steps they may take? So maybe you could walk us through the process. And I think, you had mentioned that, you start off with trying to assess the risk.
Right. So that's always the first step because a lot of businesses don't know what they don't know, right? So the first step is to assess the risk, right? Understand where you have vulnerabilities, what regulations are in place for your business, and understanding what the road is to compliance. So the first step is always to assess the risk. After you assess the risk, you have to mitigate the risk. So you take the necessary steps to close those vulnerabilities, make sure you meet compliance requirements, and have an understanding of where or when you might have another vulnerability or risk. And then it becomes a business decision of, are we going to accept this risk or are we going to mitigate it further? And then finally, you monitor the risk. So you constantly monitor, you train your users, you conduct training, you conduct perimeter tests, you do all sorts of things to make sure that you are constantly monitoring those vulnerabilities that you mitigated in step 2.
So from the process between assessing the risk to the point where now you have to go in and mitigate that risk, that's an incredible vulnerable period that you're in. Right? Because you're in an almost, you go in to do the assessment and you look and you go, oh shit, I'm in trouble. Right? Yeah. Now I got to mitigate this.
Yes.
Right? What's the standard sort of time frame on something like that? I mean, does it depend on what you find?
There are 2 factors, right? So obviously when we go in there and we do an assessment, it depends on how many devices we have to look at, how many physical data centers we have to look at. But also there's the appetite of the business to either move quickly or move a little bit more slowly. And a lot of that rests on the tolerance for inconvenience. I'll give you an example. We may find that there is a security vulnerability if users' workstations are not blacked out after 10 minutes or 15 minutes of non-activity, right? So someone's working on an accounting system. They get up to use the restroom. All the information is right on their screen, and it stays up there for anybody to walk by and look or potentially steal. So we would suggest putting a policy in place that after 10 minutes of no activity, you blank out the screen. This way it's safe and it reduces the risk of anyone stealing information. Now, some people may come back and say, well, that's really inconvenient because maybe I'll look at the screen or I'm reading something from the screen and after 10 minutes it blocks out and I have to move my mouse or something. There may not be a tolerance for that. So they may say, let's do it every 45 minutes or 60 minutes or 30 minutes. So the ability to press on with measures like that to put them in place really depends on the tolerance for that inconvenience. Another example is 2-factor authentication, right? So when you log into your PC and you enter your username and password, their 2-factor authentication would send a code to your cell phone, and you would have to press OK to further enter your PC. That may be inconvenient for people because it's a second or third step that they have to take. But again, if you're the only one with your cell phone and a code comes, you're the one that's permitting yourself to get in. If you're away from your computer and you suddenly see a code popped up and you're sitting on the beach, this is not me and somebody else has got my password and they got in. So it's things like that really depend on the business to make a decision on how quickly can we move from a very convenient and relaxed atmosphere at the office to a more regulated one that's more secure.
But I would imagine that, most employees now in their own, in their private lives with banking and whatnot, they understand this now because all the banks are using the 2-factor authentication to get into your accounts and whatnot. So I would imagine that the pushback on inconvenience for this is a lot less than it was a couple of years ago?
It certainly is a lot less, but you would be surprised at how many people don't yet adopt 2-factor authentication even on their Amazon account, which is available, right? Mm-hmm. And it brings up another interesting point, which is due to COVID and everyone working from home, businesses now have to not only be conscious of the security in their offices on Madison Avenue, but with everyone working at home, you suddenly have a vulnerability at somebody's home because depending on how they're remoting in or conducting the firm's business, they may have a huge hole in their home computer that wasn't patched by the company and is open to exploitation.
So if you're working from home and you're on your home Wi-Fi, even if you're on and you're working on it and you've done the 2-factor and you're in, and your spouse is on a computer on the same Wi-Fi that's wide open and problematic, you could be at risk.
Absolutely. Once they get in, they can exploit every device and all of the data on that network. So it's really the weakest link is what they're going to go after. So an unsecure Wi-Fi or a user that is not using two-factor authentication or doesn't use a password or doesn't use a strong password or complex password, that's where the hackers are going to go and look for those people to exploit.
I know we didn't cover this before, but I'm just thinking about it now with regards to passwords. Is there any like password keeper or anything like that you like, you recommend? Or
Absolutely. I think, first of all, passwords are becoming a thing of the past, and we're moving to passphrases, right? So instead of a word with maybe a character in it or lowercase and uppercase, we're moving to passphrases like the title of a song, or crazy phrases like, green hair on Liberty Island, things like that. But it's very difficult to remember all of these different complex passwords or passphrases.
Because you can't have one password for everything.
Exactly.
Once you give it up, you gave it up.
That's right. They have the keys to the kingdom. So yes, we always recommend the use of a password manager like Dashlane, OnePass, LastPass. These are all tools that will sit on your operating system and your mobile phone and allow you to store your passwords for different sites. Not only that, but it will help you to log into those sites. And a lot of these have password generators. So for instance, my password manager, when I go to a new site and it asks me for a password, I just click generate password and it generates a 24-character password that I don't even know. And I never need to know, because when I go back to that website, it will log me in automatically. So it's very important to move away from my dog's name, my birthday, all the things that you post on social media anyway, and go to a password manager that's going to help you not only store your passwords, but generate complex ones.
I always love when they do and women do this all the time, and I'll probably get dinged for being sexist, but women do this all the time. You see the name and like the month and day of their birth, and they're like 0509, and you're like, really? Gee, I know now. I know your first name, last name. I know about your approximate age, and now I got your birthday.
All right. So I guess back to the risk assessment. What are the typical components of your risk assessment?
So what we would do is we would go in and we would look at different areas of an organization. So the first thing we want to do is look at physical security, right? Do you have a wide open door? Is your server room, your data center, your closet where all of the computers are, is that wide open for anyone to walk into? Do you have a key, a physical key, as opposed to like a fob that will record, this was Michael and he came in on August 25th at 1:30 p.m. So after we look at the physical security, we'll look at things like, is there a firewall in place with the appropriate rules? Is there the operating system, are they getting regular updates and security patches every month? Is multi-factor authentication in place? Do they have a complex password policy? Are they backing up? Are users trained on security awareness? What about mobile phones or mobile devices? Are there passwords on those? Is the firm using encryption? Is there any cyber insurance in place? If all else fails and you are stuck with paying a ransom that you really can't afford, maybe you want a cyber insurance policy that can help you to mitigate that or recover the data, which could get expenses after you've been hacked.
I would have to think cyber insurance now is getting to be a little pricey, if even available anymore, considering the amount of breaches. And
well, like anything else, they're going to look at what reasonable steps you've taken. And the premium you're going to pay is really based on whether or not you have these good policies in place, whether or not you've done phishing testing or phishing training for your users, whether or not you have physical security in place. So all of these things play into the premium that you're going to pay. And insurance companies hire firms like mine to go in and assess it and say, how vulnerable are they? So that's a service we provide to the insurance industry.
Well, that tees us up well for segment 3, where we'll get into the logistics of the assessment and the remediation. Mm-hmm. Remind everybody you are listening to the Risk Advisor podcast, hosted by Jim Henry and Sal Lafreri. We invite you to comment on our blog at theriskadvisor.com and to subscribe and follow us on our social media on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. If you are interested in having one or both of us speak at an upcoming event or would like to consult with us, please go to the webpage at theriskadvisor.com to set that up. So, how does one get started with the cyber assessment, and how much does it cost?
Depending on the size of the firm, a standard assessment is usually very straightforward. We go in and we have a list of questions and observations that we make. We will walk around. We'll make notes on whether or not the screen blocks out, whether or not there's a physical key on the server room or any lock at all. So we go through a checklist, a very comprehensive checklist of items that we look at. And we do this for free, right? So we'll come in and we'll assess you and we'll give you a report based on what we think your vulnerabilities are and where you might be at risk for a cyber breach. And once you have that report, then we'll work with you to mitigate them.
Now, that checklist, just for those listening, that checklist is going to be available in our show notes section when we post the show. So if you go to the website, open the show, and you go down to show notes, you'll get to see what Michael's talking about.
So once the assessment is complete, we will go in, we'll present the report, and then that starts the conversation with the business owners about what steps do they really want to put in place. Do you want to force all of your users to have complex passwords that expire every 60 or 90 days? Do you want to black out the screens every 30 minutes of no inactivity? So we'll have these discussions. They'll ask a lot of questions about, well, what if we try that and we don't like it? How difficult is it to change back? Or can we do this a different way? Once we reconcile all of those questions and we have a good agreed understanding of how to proceed forward, we will then go in and we will implement the policies. We'll contact the right people to put the right locks on the doors. We'll train the users to understand what a phishing attack looks like. So we'll do all of the necessary steps. It usually takes about a month for a small to mid-sized business to do the assessment and then to mitigate the vulnerabilities.
So the owner really is party to the remediation solution and how disruptive it is, so that they can not only gauge the return on the investment and the disruptiveness, but can message it out to their people so that they are properly prepared and have minimal pushback. I guess that's really important to make this successful. It's got to be a team effort.
It's got to be a team effort, and it's something that you should be very proud of if you go through all of these steps, especially if you train your users and you make them more cyber aware. This is something you could tell your clients and really use as a selling point to say, I'm on top of this. And if you entrust your information with me, you can be sure that I'm going to keep it protected.
So there's got to be industry-wide, like certain standards that need to be met or certain protocols that have to be in place for certain industries, right?
Right.
A security company wouldn't necessarily have a, consultancy wouldn't necessarily have the same standards as a bank.
Correct.
Right?
Yeah. There are different regulations. There are different best practices in different industries, whether you're an accountant, a lawyer, or a doctor. But universally, there are certain standards that every business should meet. And these go along with some of the best practices that will be on your show notes around having complex passwords, adopting multi-factor authentication, instituting a firewall, using encryption, having regular user training sessions. All of those are just common and universal to across all industries.
So one of the things, and it's similar in the cyber world, I'm assuming, is occasionally we get asked to do red teaming, where someone wants us to test their security posture. Mm-hmm. And it's sort of, in retail, they do it, with the buyers, right? Somebody goes in and they play the role. We've done similar things where we tried to gain access to a facility in the red teaming. Mm-hmm. Talk to us a little bit about, penetration testing is what you guys call it in your world. Mm-hmm. Tell us a little about penetration testing and what you do.
Sure. So we will coordinate with the business and we will do a penetration test, which is really an ethical hack, right? So we will try our best. We'll use our security experts to try and break the firewall, to try and break a password, find a user that we can send an email to and trick them into handing over their credentials. And we will run this test to see right after mitigation and after monitoring is in place, we'll run this test to see if there are any holes that have to be closed. And this can get very rudimentary or it could be very, very invasive and could take, you could run up, $100,000 perimeter scan and test and penetration test. But
politically, how do you deal with it? Because somewhere along the line, you're pissing somebody off, right? Whether it's a director of security or the IT director or mm-hmm. The CISO or somebody. I guess I'm stumbling through the question for you, but do you find in your world there's a lot of collaboration at the C-level, or is it where the CEO comes in and says, I want this done, mm-hmm. and you go in, you do it, and all of a sudden, the CISO is there with egg on their face, looking at it, going, we were wide open, we were vulnerable.
Right. It really depends on what you want to test. A lot of small and mid-sized businesses will outsource their IT, right, to a managed service provider. And sometimes the CEO of a company will say, I want to test if they did a good job. So they won't collaborate with the IT provider and they'll say, we're going to run this penetration test and see if we can really get in. In other cases, it's more collaborative where the C-level will get together and say, we're going to have a shareholders meeting or we're going to have an annual meeting with our principals, and we want to be able to report our cyber fitness. So let's run a test and let's see if we can proudly say that we are cyber fit. So that will be a more collaborative effort, and independently, a third party would then come in and audit and see if they can get in and what vulnerabilities exist, and that just gives you a grade mark. But you're right. Depending on the test, the head of security could be put on the hot spot, right? And look very bad if someone got in and caused disruption.
So if I outsource my IT, mm-hmm. and that means another company is running the servers and running my mail and running my voicemail and holding all of our documents and whatever. Does it make sense for me as the company that's outsourcing that? Do I rely on them? Do I still need the assessment?
Absolutely. Because when you outsource your IT, you're not handing over your documents and your credentials and all of that. A good managed service provider is going to partner with you. And today, it's more likely all of your documents would go into the cloud, right? And you would have your infrastructure in the cloud, which just makes sense for small businesses. But that doesn't mean that you would not have the requisite access and credentials you need to maintain access to all that data so no one can hold you hostage. But your outsourced security team should bear the burden of making sure that you are cyber fit and making sure that the right protocols are in place and the right policies are in place to protect your firm from that. So you're basically outsourcing that responsibility to them.
But if I'm the small firm that's outsourced it to Jim's company that's providing the outsourced IT services, and I bring you in to do a penetration test, you're really not testing me, you're testing him.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely. We're testing them, but they're doing the work on your behalf. So you would get the understanding of where you're vulnerable and what your
and how
your
much they
risks are.
suck.
Right, exactly.
But the important thing is that your business clients are making a decision on whether to do business with you. That includes your IT, whether it's in-house or outsourced.
That's right.
And I think the awareness of the threats of cyber threats to the customers of those companies is now enabling companies that are making that investment, even aside from compliance, to monetize that.
Yeah.
And we're seeing in physical security, we're seeing some consultants, that are requiring a certain degree of cyber hygiene and practices and adherence and policies by the security systems integrators and by the manufacturers, to see that they meet a certain level of standards and experience and whatnot in that space, or they're not even including them on potential projects or RFPs going forward. So there again, you can get a return on that investment. It's just not all pain with no gain.
Exactly. And, sometimes I use the analogy of the letter in the restaurants, right? So in New York City, the restaurants legally have to put in an A, B, C, D rating, right? Which is based on their last health inspection, right? Now, I can tell you, anyone with a C rating or even a B rating, people are going to walk by and say, oh, I wonder what that violation was, right? But if it has an A, you feel comfortable going in there and knowing they have a good health inspection report. And it's the same thing with cybersecurity. If you know that the firm you're doing business with is cyber fit, they have good policies in place, they have a good record of not being hacked, they train their users on a regular basis, they conduct monitoring, that gives you a level of confidence that you can do business with them and you're not going to be put at unreasonable risk.
This is kind of interesting. Wish we had a little bit more time, but we do want to thank you for coming today and chatting with us about this topic. And we would just want to remind everyone that you've been listening to the Risk Advisor podcast hosted by Jim Henry and me, Sal LaFreri. We're going to ask you to subscribe to the show and like us on our social media sites like Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. If you're interested in having one or both of us speak at an upcoming event or would like to consult with us, please go to the webpage at theriskadvisor.com and set that up. Remember, you can hear the show on your favorite podcast platform, YouTube, and of course, you could stream it at theriskadvisor.com. Thanks again for listening, and we hope you tune in next week.